Welcome to the Well-Being Podcast, where every episode is a step towards a healthier, happier you. Let's grow, thrive, and shine together. Don't forget to subscribe and like the Well-Being Podcast. Share your thoughts and let us know in the comments what topics you'd love to hear about in future episodes. Today we're diving deep into a topic that's probably on your mind more than you realize: the connection between technology and mental health.
It's true. We often talk about the amazing things technology does, but I think we're finally starting to see the other side of the coin, how our constant connection might actually be impacting our mental well-being.
Yeah, it's almost like we're in this giant experiment and we're just now starting to see the results.
It,
And some of them aren't so pretty, let's be honest, we're all hooked on our devices. But there's this growing awareness of the potential downsides.
Absolutely. It's not about demonizing technology. It's about understanding it and figuring out how to use it in a way that benefits us without compromising our mental health.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, we're going to explore both the good and the bad, the benefits and the risks of technology. And most importantly, we want to give you the knowledge to make informed choices about your own tech use.
Because at the end of the day, it's all about empowering you to take control of our well-being in a digital world.
I love that. Okay, so let's get into it. One of the biggest questions out there is this: is technology actually a trigger for mental health issues?
It's a question researchers are really grappling with right now. And what's interesting is that it's not just about causing these conditions from scratch. It's more about how technology might be intensifying existing symptoms or maybe even contributing to their development in people who are already predisposed.
That makes sense. So let's start with depression. This was a big focus in the research we've got, and one thing that really struck me was this whole concept of social comparison. It's almost impossible to avoid these days, right?
It really is. You go on social media and you're bombarded with these picture-perfect lives curated feeds, highlight reels of people's best moments. It's easy to fall into the trap of comparing yourself and feeling like you don't measure up.
Oh, totally. You know, it's funny, I've actually caught myself doing that. I'll be scrolling through Instagram and suddenly I'm feeling inadequate, like my life is boring or I'm not successful enough. Yeah. And it's crazy because I know logically that those feeds are just a tiny sliver of reality.
That's exactly it. It's not the full picture, but it's so easy to get caught up in that comparison game. And the thing is, those feelings of inadequacy can actually contribute to depression, especially for younger people who are already dealing with so much.
Right. They're still figuring out who they are and where they fit in. So seeing these seemingly perfect lives online can really mess with their self-esteem. The Journal of Adolescent Health actually found that teens who use social media more often tend to report higher levels of depressive symptoms.
It's a pretty clear correlation. And it's something we need to be talking about more openly. Now, on the flip side, we've got ADHD, which is a whole other beast when it comes to technology.
And there's so many angles to consider with ADHD, right? One of the big ones in the research was the idea of overstimulation. Like our brains are getting bombarded with notifications, messages, updates. It's no wonder people are finding it harder to focus.
It's like we're constantly being pulled in a million different directions. And that can be really taxing on our attention spans, especially for young people whose brains are still developing.
It makes you wonder what this means for the future. I mean, if our brains are being wired for constant distraction, how will we ever be able to focus on anything deeply?
It's a valid concern. And it's not just about focusing, it's about learning, remembering, being present in the moment. All of those things are impacted by this constant barrage of digital stimulation.
And there are some pretty alarming statistics out there. The Pew Research Center found that teenagers who spend 7 or more hours a day on devices are twice as likely to be diagnosed with attention disorders. That's a scary thought.
It is. But it's also a wake-up call. We need to be aware of these potential risks and start having conversations about how to mitigate them both individually and as a society.
So we've got depression, we've got ADHD, but it seems like the impact of technology goes even beyond those specific conditions, right?
Right.
There are these ripple effects that touch on so many aspects of our well-being.
You're absolutely right. It's not just about these clinical diagnoses. It's about the way technology is shaping our habits, our behaviors, our relationships, our overall sense of well-being.
One area that I think is often overlooked is sleep. We all know that blue light from screens can interfere with sleep. But it wasn't until I dug into the research for this deep dive that I realized just how big of a problem it is.
What surprised you the most about it?
Honestly, it was the sheer number of people affected. A study from Harvard Medical School found that 90% of people who use their phones before bed experience sleep disruptions. That's insane.
It's a huge number. And what's crazy is that most people don't even realize how much their sleep is being impacted. They might feel a little groggy in the morning, but they don't necessarily connect it back to their tech use.
And it's not just about feeling tired either. Sleep is crucial for so many things.
Hmm.
Mood, energy levels, cognitive function. If you're not sleeping well, it's going to affect every area of your life.
Absolutely. It's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
One thing leads to another. And when you're not getting enough sleep, your mental health is one of the first things to suffer.
Another issue that's been on my mind is how technology is affecting our physical activity. I mean, we're spending so much time glued to our screens that we're missing out on exercise,
Mm.
which, as we know, is essential for both our physical and mental health.
It's the classic sedentary lifestyle, and technology is definitely a major driver of that. We're sitting at our desks, staring at computers, we're commuting in cars, we're coming home and collapsing on the couch with our phones.
And then we wonder why we're feeling anxious and depressed. Like we're forgetting that our bodies are designed to move.
Exactly. We need to make a conscious effort to build movement into our day, even if it's just taking the stairs instead of the elevator or going for a walk during our lunch break.
Okay, so we've talked about sleep, we've talked about physical activity, but here's the thing that I find most ironic about all of this. Technology connects us virtually, but it can also lead to social isolation in the real world.
It's a strange paradox, isn't it? We have thousands of Facebook friends, but we can't remember the last time we had a meaningful conversation with someone face to face.
And I think that's really at the heart of the problem. We're replacing real human interaction with these digital substitutes. And while those can be helpful in some ways, they can't replace the depth and nuance of real-world connections.
You need that face-to-face time to truly connect, to build empathy, to develop social skills.
Absolutely. A Cygnus study found that people who use social media a lot are actually more likely to feel lonely than those who use it less. 63% of heavy users reported feeling lonely compared to just 43% of light users.
That's a pretty significant difference. And it really highlights the importance of prioritizing those real-world connections. We need to make time for face-to-face interaction to nourish our relationships, to build a sense of community.
So we've talked about a lot of the downsides of technology, but the good news is that there are things we can do to protect our mental well-being in this digital world. And we're going to delve into those solutions in the next part of this deep dive.
We're going to give you practical, actionable strategies that you can start implementing right away. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Wellbeing Podcast, where we're continuing our deep dive into the impact of technology on mental health.
So the last part, we explored some of the potential downsides of technology overuse, especially when it comes to things like depression and ADHD. But now we're going to shift gears and focus on solutions. Because there's a lot we can do to protect our mental well-being in a digital world.
Absolutely. It's not all doom and gloom. We have the power to choose how we interact with technology and to create a digital lifestyle that actually supports our well-being. I love that perspective. So let's dive into some practical strategies, starting with one that I know we've all heard before, but it's so important. Setting time limits for technology use.
You know, it's funny because it sounds so simple, but it can be one of the hardest things to actually do.
It really can. You know, it's like we have this love-hate relationship with our devices. We rely on them for so much, but then we get frustrated when we feel like they're controlling us.
Exactly. And setting time limits is a way to reclaim that control. It's about being intentional with how we're using technology instead of just letting it use us.
I've been trying to be more mindful of this lately. And one thing that's helped me is actually scheduling specific times for checking social media or email instead of just constantly being on it throughout the day.
That's a great strategy. It takes the decision fatigue out of it. You know, instead of constantly having to decide whether or not to check your phone, you've already made that decision ahead of time.
Right. And it frees up so much mental space because you're not constantly thinking about those notifications or feeling obligated to respond immediately.
And there are so many tools available to help with this too. You know, there are apps that can track your screen time, block certain websites, or even send you reminders to take breaks.
I think a lot of people don't realize that those features even exist on their phones. They're just buried in the settings somewhere.
They are, but they can be really helpful if you take the time to explore them. Now, another strategy that I think is crucial is prioritizing real-world connections.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is something I'm super passionate about because I truly believe that human connection is essential for our well-being.
It's not just a nice to have, it's a need to have. We're social creatures by nature. We thrive on connection. We need those face-to-face interactions to feel grounded, to feel loved, to feel like we belong.
And in a world that's increasingly dominated by digital interactions, it's more important than ever to make a conscious effort to nurture those real-world relationships.
You know, it's funny because sometimes I feel like technology can actually make us feel more isolated, even though it's supposed to be connecting us.
I know exactly what you mean. It's like we're surrounded by people online, but we still feel lonely.
Right, and that's because those digital connections can only go so deep. You need that in-person interaction to really build trust and intimacy.
So how do we do that in a world where everyone's so busy and plugged in?
It takes effort, but it's so worth it. It could be something as simple as having dinner with friends without phones at the table, or going for a walk with a loved one without checking emails.
Or even just making eye contact with the cashier at the grocery store and having a brief conversation.
Those little moments of human connection can really add up throughout the day.
Okay, so we've talked about setting time limits and prioritizing real-world connections. What are some other strategies that people can use to create a healthier relationship with technology?
Well, one that I am a big advocate for is practicing mindful technology use.
What exactly does that mean?
It's about being intentional and present when you're using technology instead of just mindlessly scrolling or clicking through things.
So it's kind of like mindfulness meditation, but for technology.
Exactly. It's about bringing that same awareness and attention to your digital interactions.
I love that. So how do we actually do that?
Well, one way is to start by noticing your habits. When do you reach for your phone? What are you feeling when you do? What kind of content are you consuming?
That's so interesting. I've never really thought about it that way,
Hmm.
but it makes sense.
Hmm.
If we can become more aware of our patterns, we can start to change them.
Right. And once you've started to notice your habits, you can start to make conscious choices about how you want to use technology.
So, for example, if you find yourself mindlessly scrolling through social media for hours on end, you could try setting a timer for 15 minutes and then putting your phone away.
Or if you're feeling overwhelmed by emails, you could try designating specific times for checking them instead of constantly being on high alert.
And if you're feeling anxious or depressed after spending time online, you could try unfollowing accounts that trigger those feelings or taking a break from certain platforms altogether.
It's all about finding what works for you and creating a digital environment that supports your well-being.
I love that. So we've talked about setting time limits, prioritizing real-world connections, and practicing mindful technology use. What other strategies can we use to protect our mental health in a digital world?
Well, one that's often overlooked is the importance of creating tech-free zones in your home.
Oh, that's a good one. I've been trying to do that more in my own life, especially in the bedroom.
The bedroom is definitely a key area because the blue light emitted from devices can interfere with melatonin production and make it harder to fall asleep.
I've noticed a huge difference in my sleep quality since I started leaving my phone in another room at night.
It's amazing how much of an impact that can have. And it's not just about sleep either. Creating tech-free zones in other areas of the home, like the dining room or living room, can encourage more meaningful face-to-face interactions.
It's like reclaiming those spaces for connection and presence, instead of letting technology dominate every aspect of our lives.
Exactly, and it sends a message to your family and friends that you value those in-person interactions.
Okay, so tech-free zones are a great idea. What about offline activities?
Offline activities are essential for maintaining a healthy balance between the digital and the real world.
I think a lot of people forget how much joy and fulfillment they can get from activities that don't involve screens.
It's so true. It could be anything from reading a book to going for a walk in nature to spending time with loved ones.
Or learning a new skill or volunteering in your community.
The key is to find activities that nourish your soul and help you disconnect from the constant stimulation of technology.
And I think it's important to remember that it's not about completely eliminating technology from our lives. It's about using it in a way that supports our well-being and doesn't detract from our overall quality of life.
Absolutely. Technology can be a powerful tool for good, but it's up to us to use it wisely.
Welcome back to the Wellbeing Podcast for the final part of our deep dive into technology and mental health.
It's been a really interesting conversation so far. We've explored both the potential downsides of technology overuse and some empowering strategies for creating a healthier relationship with our devices.
Absolutely. And now we're going to shift gears a bit and open up the conversation to you, our listeners. We've received some fantastic questions and comments, and we're excited to share our insights.
So let's dive right in.
Okay, our first question comes from a listener who asks, I'm a parent of 2 young children, and I'm really worried about how much screen time they're getting. What are some practical tips for managing technology use in families?
That's a great question and one that I hear from parents all the time. It's tricky because technology is so integrated into our lives these days, but it's definitely possible to create healthy boundaries and habits.
So what is some of the things that parents can do?
Well, one of the most important things is to establish clear expectations and rules around technology use. Sit down with your kids and have a conversation about how much screen time is appropriate, what kind of content is allowed, and when devices need to be turned off.
Right. It's not just about setting the rules. It's about modeling those healthy habits yourself.
Yeah.
If you're constantly in your phone, your kids are going to pick up on that.
Absolutely. Kids learn by watching us. So it's
Yeah.
important to be mindful of our own technology use and to make sure we're setting a good example.
Another thing that I think is really helpful is to create tech-free zones in the home, like the dinner table or the
That's
bedrooms.
a great idea. It helps to create boundaries and to designate certain spaces for connection and presence.
And don't underestimate the power of offline activities. Encourage your kids to play outside, read books, engage in hobbies that don't involve screens.
It's all about creating a balance and making sure that technology isn't dominating their lives.
Our next question comes from a listener who says, I know I should be limiting my social media use, but I find it so addictive. Any tips for breaking the scroll?
Oh, I think we can all relate to that. One, social media is designed to be addictive. With the notifications and the endless feeds, it's easy to get sucked in.
I know I've definitely fallen down the rabbit hole more times than I can count. So what can we do about it?
Well, one thing that can be really helpful is to turn off those notifications. So you're not constantly being pinged and tempted to check your phone.
That's a good one. I've actually started doing that recently, and it's made a huge difference.
Another strategy is to set specific times for checking social media instead of just mindlessly scrolling throughout the day. Maybe you decide to check it for 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night. That way you're still staying connected, but you're not letting it consume your entire day.
That's a great tip. And if you're really struggling, you could try deleting the apps from your phone altogether, or at least moving them off your home screen so they're not so easily accessible.
It's all about making it harder to engage in those unhealthy habits and easier to engage in healthier ones.
Our final question comes from a listener who asks, what are some healthy tech habits that you personally practice?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, one thing I do is I try to keep my phone out of the bedroom at night. It helps me to sleep better and to wake up feeling more refreshed.
I do the same thing. It's made a huge difference in my sleep quality.
Another thing I do is I try to be more mindful of the content I'm consuming online. I unfollow accounts that make me feel bad about myself, and I seek out content that inspires me or educates me.
I love that. It's so important to be intentional about what we're letting into our minds.
Absolutely. And lastly, I try to make time for offline activities every day. Whether it's going for a walk, reading a book, or spending time with loved ones, it's
hmm
important to have those moments where I'm not plugged in and I can just be present in the moment.
Those are all such great tips.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good reminder that we all have the power to create a healthier relationship with technology. It's just a matter of being mindful of our habits and making small changes over time.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Just pick one or two things that resonate with you and start there.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into technology and mental health. We hope you found this episode informative and empowering. And remember, technology is a tool. Like any tool can be used for good or for bad. It's up to us to decide how we want to use it. So let's all make a conscious effort to use technology in a way that supports our well-being and helps us live happier, more fulfilling lives. Thanks for listening to the Wellbeing Podcast. Take care, stay inspired, and see you next time.